Let's now switch gears and focus on the state of the nation and what really stood out yesterday. And I want to read a quote. President Uhuru Kenyatta stating, "If there was anything I said last year that hurt or wounded you, if I damaged the unity of this country in any way, I ask you to forgive me and to join me in repairing that harm." Joining me in studio to talk a bit about this, let me start from my far right there, is the MP of Nyeri Town, Gonjiri Wambugu. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ahiga.
And right next to him is the Advocate of the High Court, Steve Ogola. Welcome to the program as well.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, you both heard what the president had to say yesterday, but I want to contrast or compare and contrast that with something he said about 2 weeks ago when he was live on a CNN show, Nampur. That is in London. He was asked a question quite similar to what he spoke about yesterday, and this is what he had to say.
Before I dig down more into that, I just want to know, for the parents' sake, do you, as President of Kenya, offer an apology to the parents of the innocent dead?
I abhor all loss of life, and to all those who were hurt on both sides of the political divide. As far as I'm concerned, we have no responsibility for those, given the actions that were taken. But as a parent myself, I feel for them, I sympathize with them, and I give them my assurance that I will do everything that is in my power to ensure that this kind of thing never happens again, and make available all channels to ensure that anybody who lost life or property is availed a channel to get justice.
Well, the word apologies there. Gentlemen, thanks so much for finding time to be here with me. Let me start with you, Honorable Wambugu. Let me get your thoughts generally on the state of the nation and specifically the president's apology.
Thank you, Edgar. First and foremost, I think yesterday was one of the best State of the Nation addresses we've had in a long time. Part of the reason being that the underlying theme of that particular State of the Nation was unity, trying to bring unity, reconciliation, bringing the country together, which is the context in which we must view the apology. I have seen the effort, or maybe the feeling that maybe what he had said on CNN is different
from what he was saying yesterday.
But it's not. If you remember, if you listen to his speech, he actually came to the point of regretting what the firm steps that had to be taken during the disruptions.
You felt that came out.
He actually made that point even in his speech. He said it's regrettable that we had to take some decisions during the efforts to disrupt the elections. And then he said we should never have to get there again. Same thing he said. When you listen to him on CNN, he's saying we had a situation where things happened. Then he says, as a parent. So he's actually removing himself. And that's the same thing he was doing yesterday. He says, as a head of state, some decisions had to be made. They were painful, they were difficult, they were hard, and the security agencies carried themselves up to a certain point. And then he comes and says, but you know what? If there's at any point in which I made anybody upset, I hurt anyone, I apologize.
Okay.
So you see that dichotomy of his personality.
So you don't see a contradiction with what he said on CNN and what he said yesterday?
No, I don't see a contradiction at all.
Steve, where do you come in on this?
Well, I think, Wega, we may appreciate, but also receive with caution. Appreciate because...
appreciate what? The apology?
Appreciate the apology and the statement yesterday because Kenya's reputation as the democracy lies primarily in its ability to problem solve without external assistance. So anything that brings leaders together is a welcome move and a much needed relief. Now, caution in the sense that the political elite have not communicated the philosophy. They have not communicated the philosophy around this newfound handshake and the consequences of that handshake, you know, the apology and the much needed shift. What I require of these politicians are this. They must remember that the Constitution already provides inbuilt safeguard or constitutional control mechanism to ensure that there's cohesion, there's inclusiveness, there's transparency and accountability in our order of governance. It's not open or should not be open to political elite to determine when the country is peaceful or quiet and when the country should get into conflict and controversy. So I think the presidency and the political elite must communicate with clarity. What is it? Has there been a significant change in the philosophical and ideological persuasion to match the expectation of the Constitution, or this is just a handshake based on convenience? If it is based on convenience, then I can tell Kenyans that we may just revert back to the normal bickering that our political elite have always subjected us to.
Okay. We keep taking a look at that. And now let me just read that quote again one more time. If there was anything I said last year that hurt or wounded you, if I damaged the unity of this country in any way, I ask you to forgive me and to join me in repairing the harm. I'm not the only leader who felt deeply the need to restore unity. And of course, you also talked a little bit about the Right Honorable Raila Odinga and praised his statesmanship as well. But there's something else he also mentioned yesterday in the State of the Nation address. I don't know if we can play that clip now. He spoke about the general election being more secure than it was in the past, but regrettably, and that's what you were saying, Honorable Wambugu. If we can play that clip now and just get what the President had to say on the police and matters to do that. Okay, we'll play that a bit later on and get your thoughts on that. Let me come back to you, Honorable Wambugu, and get your thoughts on other issues. We did not see a direct condemnation of some of the incidents that we saw last year. Is that something of worry? In a sense, it was more of a general apology. If I, that sort of thing. For you, that captured accurately the feelings of the President?
I think one of the things that is important for us to keep thinking about, one of the points the President made was that during the handshake, there were things they agreed on. There were things they could not agree on. And he was making the point that the fact that unity doesn't mean that we have to agree on everything. And that's most probably going to be one of the things that's going to be discussed in coming days. For example, there are people who feel that that some of the things that happened last year should not have happened. There are other people who argue that there was no option but to go the way it went. There are people who will tell you that the police used excessive force. There are other people who are saying that, you know what, at the point at which we had reached, the kind of disruption we were having, the police did not have a choice. Of course, there were regrettable things that happened. The children who died during those things, that one I do not think anybody is going to argue with the fact that those should not have happened. But then the issues about how firm the police, the security agencies should have been, and not, it's going to be one of those things that we are most probably going to have as different opinions as you listen to, especially according to which political divide you belong to. And the fact that we are working on building a united and reconciliation doesn't mean that we are going to agree that now our past is agreeable. We are still going to have situations where if you ask me what I think about what happened, I will have a position. If you ask somebody from NASA, he will have a different position. And that, according to the President, what he was saying, doesn't mean we should fight about it.
So it's one of those things that we may
agree to disagree on some issues, but agree that the country is bigger than all of us. That now, this is where we are. How do we move forward and ensure that the things that happened do not happen again?
Steve, would that apology have come without the handshake, in your view?
The apology ought to have been there, but the sincerity of that apology must be accompanied by the attendant consequences, action points. One, is there going to be reparation for victims, you know, of those transgressions? Two, is there going to be accountability? What is not open the political elite is to walk us into conflict and controversy so casually, then walk us out, then expect us to forget without making any further demands. It would also be expected that sometimes apology means being open to accountability. Who are these people that used excessive force? And I disagree politely with Mheshimiwa. There is no justification for failing to comply with what the Constitution has set as our minimum standard requirements. Observance of human rights is an inextricable component of our governance. Any government of the day must innovate within the challenges and make sure that whatever tension that is there in the country, whatever challenge of governance that may present itself, they do not descend into this level where now there must be this brazen or flagrant abuse of human rights, non-compliance with the Constitution, disobedience of court orders, just because the political climate may require, so the way the Mheshimiwa is saying. I think that is the kind of honest admission that the political elite must first of all make. Then they must be open to accountability, and Kenyans must remember that now that there is peace and quiet and national tranquility, let us now debate more honestly on how our political class can disinherit the culture of bad manners. Bad manners in the sense that they tell us when it is convenient to build consensus, then they tell us when it is not convenient to build consensus, and Kenyans are required to fall into formation. That is where the problem lies. The signal is
one gets a feeling that we're a bit like sheep.
Yes, we need to disengage from that.
Honorable Jacob Midio, former Member of Parliament, GEM, and of course a notable commentator as well. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, thank you.
I'm sure you had a chance to watch the President's State of the Nation address. Yeah. What were your thoughts?
I thought it was pretty good. I thought in recognizing that this country must be peaceful and that we must create a scenario where we can dialogue amongst ourselves. I think that was, you have to give the president thumbs up. That he apologized for the events of last year and basically the events of our recent past. I think they always say there are two things men fear to do: to say I'm sorry and to say I love you. I think the president was,
at least one of them he has.
He was a man. He was a real man. I think somebody has to apologize. As to which way forward, I think when we brought in the new constitution, we said 20% was bad. And the 20% which was bad, we must work on. I think it creates an opportunity to, for us to sit down and begin to work on it. Because that 20%, where I come from, they say fish begins to rot from the head. And I think this fish has a rotten head. The
fish is Kenya?
Fish is Kenya. And Mbugu, let me just tell you, there is no excuse under the sun where police should behave the way they behaved. One of the things which we have in this country, which we must change in the 20%, is to tame the political class. The imagination that politicians have...
And you're speaking as a politician? As a politician.
Okay. The imagination that politicians have that they are above the law and they can tell the police when to shoot to kill or when to misbehave. That does not happen everywhere. In just this year, you saw the investigation about Netanyahu. Ordinary policeman, he investigates the prime minister and says this guy must be taken to court. You know, in Kenya, even a member of parliament who is not sitting, a former like me, a policeman, would, when they come to you, they first apologize. They assume you are above the law. That we must do. And I can tell you as I finish, Maura, the problem of this country is the fact that the civil service was brought below powers of politicians during the Nyayo era. And that must change. We must
never risen above that.
We must make civil servants above politicians. We must. And when you do that, a politician will not have the power to do roadside declarations.
Let me allow Honorable Wambugu to respond. Your name has been mentioned in his statement, so it's only fair that I give you a chance to
First and foremost, you know, I'm a member of the National Security Committee in Parliament. And one of the things that's being a member of that committee allows you to do is to actually understand some of the circumstances in which some of these things were done. I always argue there's a reason we have police officers. The reason we have police officers is to ensure that we have law and order. The reason we equip police officers as we do is so that they can actually enforce that work, that responsibility. Enforcing responsibility of law and order gets untidy sometimes. It's part of the reason why you give police officers guns, is the reason you give them truncheons. We buy these things using taxpayers' money. We know we're equipping police officers with these things, and that there could actually arise an occasion when they will use them. Now, the argument about at which point, see, when I think through all of last year, I keep trying to ask myself, at what point politicians ordered police officers to do certain things? I don't remember. Because remember, a lot of the times what we were listening to, what we were hearing, were civil servants, whether it was the PS from Interior or the IG himself, making declarations of what needed to be done. It was actually very interesting because during that period, I think politically, the situation was, it would actually have been very dangerous for a politician to instruct the police to do something. Of course, there were politicians from both sides of the divide who are saying their own things about what they expected to be done. Some people, I mean, we had radicals and extremists from both sides. But in terms of how the police officers dealt with these things, I always remember the swearing in, for example. On the swearing in that happened on the 30th.
At Uhuru Park.
and how the police just basically fell out and decided to allow that to happen. And I'm asking myself, which politician gave that instruction? Because we have to also accept that police officers are also part of the society in which we live in. They have their own, as a system, they'll be looking and saying, okay, are we going to allow a demonstration to come into the central business district? I know I have been forced, personally, I've been challenging this notion that our liberties and our freedoms of, for example, of demonstrations come into my freedom to be able to continue. If I'm not demonstrating, you have the freedom to demonstrate. I have the freedom to continue doing what I'm supposed to be doing. At what point do the police get into this thing? If you are getting into my space where I am working, you're here in Citizen, you're doing your thing, and a guy decides to demonstrate and come in here. Is a policeman allowed to stop that guy from coming in here? And when he's stopping that guy from coming in here, the person who is being stopped is going to say his freedom of demonstration is being curtailed. When you say but he's protecting your freedom, you who is not demonstrating. Because you also have a freedom to be able to go about your business. When you say stopped, are you talking about a one-off action or different things that the policeman can do? Because I guess one of the biggest arguments have been, yes, how do the police stop? Exactly. And you see, the issue here we should be discussing is, how do the police stop people? And how should a policeman stop a guy who's got a stone on a sling? Because we saw that. Steve, do you have the answer to that?
Waiga, the thing is this. Law and common sense are inextricably linked. You can divorce the two. And everybody who is in a position of authority is required to apply common sense, not manipulative approach to interpretation of the law, so that they have a chaotic expansion of their mandate. Of course, if you do something that exceeds what, because you must balance your right vis-a-vis the duties that you have against other people, so that in the enjoyment of your rights is within a space or framework that doesn't disrupt the order of governance or the enjoyment of other people's rights. But you should not manipulate authority or rely on raw power and fear in execution of your functions. And let's not be naive, or let's not try to be too decent as to apologize to the National Police Service. There was a spectacular fail in terms of minimum compliance with the law, respect for human rights, compliance with the Constitution. The police also took cue from both sides of the political elite. We said it time without number that NASA and Jubilee, as they were then, equally manipulated the Constitution for partisan benefit. You look at the Constitution, read it, say, how can I expand it? How can I expand it to fit this? So I'm going to use this provision of the Constitution as my entry point, then begin to manipulate it to achieve a particular end. And we saw those in the Jubilee administration trying to use that to maintain stability, excessive response, to instill fear. So it's no longer possible for you to go out there. And that's also being too defiant, and say, this is our right, this is our article, direct exercise of sovereignty, you get. And those aspects then getting into conflict and controversy. But those of the political elite, they have not disinherited the bad manners, the political culture in the pre-2010 dispensation. The law enforcement agencies must have a sober and dispassionate approach to work. It is not open to them that we should excuse them from accountability for the actions they did. And I think going forward, what we need is this. Now that there is a handshake, and the consequence of that handshake is that people are building consensus on what needs to be done, I think let us have a decent closure, on the things that happened before, before we then begin to move forward. That decent closure means, can we identify areas that require honest admission, apology, and forgiveness, number one? Can we identify areas that require reparation, compensation for people that lost their lives and properties, second level? At the third level, can we identify persons to hold accountable? Can they be rehabilitated behind bars for learning and documentation, so that as we move forward, Mheshimiwa spoke to it, as we move forward, we know that now truly there is an honest desire to reorganize our style and technique of governance. And the way we do things in this country. Let me give you the last word on this, because that's not the only topic the president spoke about yesterday.
Okay. But, Wambugu, let me tell you this. We don't buy guns for police to use to kill civilians. Police, their primary job is to protect civilians.
True. Completely.
So that when you are in Kisumu, like I was in one of the days when people were demonstrating, when the police are busy raping women in Obunga, which is 5 kilometers away from Kisumu.
Was this
that was documented
in a report?
Very documented.
You need to tell us where that
exactly, and even the normal case of the notorious case of Baby Pendo.
Okay. That has been well documented.
Nyalenda is a slum 4 or 5 kilometers away from the city center. How did police get there? What is a slum primarily away from the city? Why? What would the police be going there at night to shoot people? Where would that fit? I thought, Maura, the best way to do this is take it from where the president left it. He said he learned a lesson. He said, in fact, he said we, then he said no, I watched him. He said he, Uhuru Kenyatta, he learned a lesson from what happened to us in the recent past. And I think that's why we need to take it. I think let what is be, let what was pass, and let us be faithful to the future. And let us do something for our people. And this is so doable. And I told you, the problem is political in this country. The problem is rogue politicians. We seem to think that as long as you're a politician, you can operate outside the law.
It sounds like you're also here to give an apology.
Well,
yourself.
No, I'm a very Christian person, and if I've offended anybody, I apologize. I want to be forgiven. I want to be forgiven. It's always good to take cue from a good act.
Okay.
I thought the president went above the rest of us when he said, you know what people were saying, that Uhuru takes office for the second term, he will be lazy, he will not be working. The Uhuru who has surfaced has surprised all and sundry. And personally, I am proud that he went out of his way to handshake so that, number one, he could get legitimacy. Remember the last time you interviewed me, I was in Kisumu, I spoke about the issue of legitimacy. And I think he has beaten all of us hands down.
Let me get a reaction now from Honorable Ambugu. Even as you talk about that, let's talk about the Building Bridges initiative. There were expectations that a full revelation of what came out of the handshake would be made public, goals, timelines, specific details that Kenyans can hold our leaders accountable to. But one gets the feeling yesterday that what we had was a repeat of what we've been hearing in the past, general intentions, but nothing specific, that by 2020 we expect this to have happened, by 2019 this will have happened, and by 2022 this is where Kenya should be. I don't know whether we had a lot of that, but let me get your perspective.
Thank you. I think the issue of the reconciliation, okay, though I must
go ahead.
Respond quickly to the issue of how police work. Yes, the police protect civilians, but sometimes they protect civilians from other civilians. We always need to remember that sometimes, because the people they are also protecting the civilians from tend to be other civilians. So it's important for us to always, I say this because it's important for us to keep remembering. I keep seeing us beating up on police officers like they do not belong to our society. We could have bad airports like in any other sector, but we can't beat up an entire police force, because the reason they are there is to protect us, and sometimes they're protecting us from ourselves, from just within ourselves. So I needed to make that point. But then going to the issue of building bridges. The issue of building bridges, for me, I see Honorable Raila and His Excellency the President have given us an end state of where they want to get. They want to get to a situation where we never go to where we are again, where politics doesn't divide us, that a post-election situation is not one that requires a handshake for the country to move on. That's their end state. And they've told us where we are and where we're beginning. In fact, yesterday, he actually did speak a bit more about the handshake than he has in the past. We have not had a clear understanding of what the handshake was about. We've had people interpreting it to mean 2022 politics. Yeah, we've even had people saying that Raila is joining the Jubilee government. We had rumors going around yesterday that he was going to be given a a job in the government. I mean, we've had people speculating everywhere about what this was about. Yesterday, the president actually explained. The handshake was about reconciliation. I haven't had that word used before. We have had people speaking about we did a handshake, we are moving forward. He said this handshake is primarily about reconciliation, meaning that we've had two parts of the country that have been pulling in opposite direction. And what he was saying is we reached across that chasm. I reached across from this side, Raila Odinga reached across from that side, we joined hands. And for us, and then he got all of us to shake hands. And he was saying, look, you need to devolve this handshake. You need to start reaching out from everywhere you are, so that anywhere there's a division between you and your neighbor, between you and somebody from another community, what we did needs to be de-escalated down, so that this handshakes gets meaning. It stops being just about Raila and Uhuru. It goes down to being about myself and somebody in parliament who we never agreed on. It goes to being about guys in the village with their neighbors. That's what the handshake is supposed to be. Once we first understand the concept of the handshake being a tool of reconciliation, then we are able now to move on to the point of, okay, we have now reconciled. What my brother was saying, what are the issues we need to deal with? And I love the fact that he qualified it. And he said, look, even when we did the handshake, we didn't agree on everything, but we did the handshake. We sat and we tried, you know, and he didn't go into the details of what they didn't agree on and what they have agreed on. But I also believe that part of the fact that we are seeing progress means that there are things they agreed on immediately. There are things they did not agree on, which they are agreeing on. There are things that are still outstanding that they haven't agreed on, that they're going to work on. And maybe there are things they'll never agree on. Okay. But all these phases are part of how we build a nation. We can't always agree.
I think the concern would be if Kenyans are the ones who give their leaders power,
yes,
then if their leaders do a handshake and start discussing certain issues, shouldn't Kenyans be involved every step of the way? Because the power is in the people according to the Constitution.
I think one of the other things we have to accept is that when we give responsibility to leaders, we actually give them responsibility, because part of leadership means that you are going to make some hard decisions.
I'm not sure I fully agree, but keep going.
Think about it. When you actually elect people, when you elect a member of parliament, you give him the responsibility to make laws. You can't make laws. You give him that responsibility. He goes into that parliament. We have 340 people who make laws for 40 close to 50 million people. So you actually give them a responsibility. And you want to believe that you made a good decision to that, whether it's an MCA, an MP, senator, governor, president. Because from then on, and for 5 years, he's going to be making decisions. He's going to get into international agreements. He's going to take loans. You are believing that he has taken this responsibility that you've given him.
A bit. Steve, you have been itching to jump into this particular discussion. And I think what I was trying to probe Honorable Mbugu about was, where is public participation in the handshake? And I think that is the challenge that many Kenyans are grappling with.
I agree. Let me just reference one thing. Building bridges has possibilities of success if it is accompanied by honesty and decency. Two things that are lacking in this within our political elite. Now, President Uhuru Kenyatta enjoys an enviable position. You see, unlike the deputy president, who is continuously being delegitimized and demonized for being power hungry, being raw, being involved in primitive accumulation of wealth, Uhuru Kenyatta enjoys strangely a bit of confidence. People say that he's likable, that he's disinterested in power, and only that people around him manipulate him. You see, he can harness that when you're talking about building bridges. Now, what I pray that the path he doesn't take is this. We don't want boardroom solutions to national problems. We don't want that. The Constitution has ordained a consultative, deliberative, and negotiated approach, punctuated by public participation every step of the way, as you've said it. That is the predictable pathway ordained by the Constitution. Let us not defer that responsibility to political elite. Because political elite, they have the binary interest of what they communicate publicly as the national interest, but then they also have the undisclosed personal interest of self-actualization as politicians. Maybe someone wants to capitalize on this opportunity after the handshake to gain some political capital or even economic empowerment. You never know. Everybody has natural human frailties, and politicians are alive to their own personal interests. If we leave the issue of post-handshake building bridges entirely to politicians, we run the risk that at one point, if things go south, then we may begin to regret and start blaming politicians that we have gone round in circles. I think let us follow the predictable pathway ordained by the Constitution. Isolate the issue. Is it enforcement of the Constitution? Let us then say, from now on, we respect court orders. Is it the question of human rights? Let us say that we have an institution known as Kenya National Commission on Human Rights that has the primary mandate of oversighting compliance with human rights. Let us not exclude them even as we build bridges. If it is devolution, we have the Council of Governors, we have the Intergovernmental Relations Act that has structures under it that can ensure that whatever it is that we need to make devolution better, we mainstream it in that forum. If we just defer everything to the passion and discretion of the political class, we run the risk, as I've said, that one day down the road, once we hit a roadblock, we may say that, you see, politicians can't be trusted. They must tell us, first of all, that yes, they are now open to dialogue. They have disinherited bad manners, the culture of dishonesty, and indecency. And now we negotiate and transact in openness, transparency, and accountability. We will get it right. Allow
me to interrupt you. The Honorable Midiwa, I'm coming to you shortly. Let's now go to John Wanyama. He's on standby to get a reaction to the President's State of the Nation address. Wanyama, over to you.
Thank you, Wahiga. And in Uasin Gishu, indeed, residents were really expecting a lot from the President's speech yesterday as we were speaking to them. And one of the major things they were so keen on, Wahiga, is that they wanted the President to tell Kenyans what he had in the package with the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. And what does that handshake mean to Kenyans? But unfortunately, the President really avoided that and he didn't go into detail about that. But most Kenyans have really received the speech of the President yesterday positively, especially in that part of forgiveness and requesting Kenyans that they should live together as a brother and a sister. With me is a politician who vied for Tarbo constituency, and these are the people, Wahiga, who make Kenyans to fight. Not Kenyans, they don't fight. And you understand, politicians are the one who make Kenyans feel like the world or the country is not united, whereas Kenya is very united. I'm talking to Mr. Kevin Okwara, who vied for Tarbo constituency. Mheshimiwa, if you can come closer to me, what is your take on President Uhuru's speech yesterday?
Well, I listened to His Excellency the President's speech yesterday, and I think apart from the fact that he dwelt on corruption, which I think was the first part of his speech, I liked his concluding remarks, and his concluding remarks about the handshake between him and Raila Odinga. I like the fact that he came out very strongly and he asked apologies to Kenyans. He said if he's wronged anybody, he should be forgiven, and if anybody has wronged him, he should forgive him. What I'd like to say, my brother Wanyama, is that this country is bigger than we politicians. Sometimes we go to political context and we hurt one another. We say words that sometimes followers will take very seriously. But we need to come to a point where we realize that Kenya is much bigger than Uhuru Kenyatta. Kenya is bigger than Raila Odinga. And the handshake that was extended to Raila Odinga, and I was very happy to see it in Parliament also, the politicians were greeting one another. I pray that this can trickle down to Mwananchi, because we also had very tough contests within the county governments. People stood and they went into politics. The politics were very fearful. They were fearless. They were quite aggressive. I pray that that handshake, even at the county level, we should come together as communities and begin to tell one another, let's work together. This country is bigger. Our counties are bigger than individuals, such that that reconciliation we saw at the national level should trickle down to the grassroots. Let Mwananchi, whether you are staying with a neighbor who you did not agree with politically, I think it is time you began to eat and to speak together. It's time that you began to take that neighbor and say, hey, Jama, let's handshake, let's come together and build this country. We have a nation that we need tomorrow. We can't destroy this country today because of one particular person's ambition. This country is supposed to be there 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 90 years from now. What will our generation of young boys and girls say to us if we destroyed this country today?
Maybe have you forgiven your opponent, also the one you were fighting with, because you had also a big following?
That's a very interesting question. We went into political contest in Tarbo, and so far so good. You realize that I've kept a very low profile because I recognize there's a leader, and For me, it was politics. I know our politics were high voltage. And I think I would want to say to the people of Uasin Gishu, wakati umefika, tusalimiane, na tujenge taifa yetu, tujenge kaunti yetu, tuendelee mbele.
Thank you very much, Wahiga. That is the leader who was vying for Taribo constituency in the last election. And whatever, the message on the ground is one, Wahiga, that let's extend this handshake from the handshake to elbow so that Kenyans can now at least live as a brother and a sister. And from the president, it was an expected speech or a word from him. And most of African leaders, Wahiga, you know, they rarely apologize. But for this one, Kenyans were impressed, and they are hoping and praying that Kenya will continue like this for the future. Back to you, Wahiga.
Indeed, those are the hopes and prayers of everyone. Thank you so much, John Wanyama, for that update. And of course, there's a lot the president spoke about yesterday, and I think it's not fair to wrap up this discussion without talking a bit about corruption and slaying the corruption dragon that has slowed down a lot of development in the country. The president spoke about this. Let's listen to what he had to say yesterday.
When one could enjoy public goods without fear that action will be taken against you, are gone. And indeed, to demonstrate this point, last year, ill-gotten public assets valued at approximately Kenya shillings 500 million were recovered, and civil proceedings were instituted for the preservation and recovery of other assets valued at more than Kenya shillings 6 billion. And indeed, I do expect that the new officials whom we have worked together to put in office, both in prosecution and investigations, will bring cases against all, including the powerful and privileged, to show Kenyans that none of us are above the law.
In a nutshell, the president was saying we are winning the war against corruption. Let me get a reaction from my guests here in studio, even as they give me their final thoughts. Honorable Midiwa, I'll start with you, and please also mention corruption as you give us your thoughts.
Well, yeah, I will begin with that. All Uhuru Kenyatta has to do is arrest 2 governors. You will deal with corruption from the root.
Just 2?
Just 2.
At what level? Are you talking about parastatal heads?
Governors.
Governors.
Governors. The problem in this country, you know, the president went on and on talking about issues of health. Ohiga, when the last budget before devolution, we gave 4.3 billion shillings to KEMSA to bring drugs, and there were drugs in hospital. Last year, the governors spent 130 billion shillings. And Kenyans are dying like chicken. There's no drugs. It is theft. And if you talk to people in corridors of justice, they say this governor, some have 20 files, 30 files of corruption.
At the EACC or somewhere?
Yes, and somebody is busy just collecting money, which is public funds, whenever they go to try to make those arrests or to bring them to book. If I was the president, you can't do everything. Kenya has too many issues. Just deal with 1 or 2.
Yes, chosen 4.
It will be fine. Just deal with, but I'm talking about deal with 2 individuals, and the rest will be history. The other thing I wanted to say about this issue of handshake. Steve went on and on trying to say how it must be done within the law. Steve, I don't need law to greet you. I don't need law to greet you. The thing is, Mr. Odinga just paid a courtesy call to the president. Apparently it was pre-arranged, which is good for our country. They are leaders. I mean, you can't ignore them. But tell me, which 2 leaders in this country will just meet in front of Arambe House and greet each other and things are mollified? It only takes Agwambo and UK. There's no other people. All these other people are pretenders to the throne.
All the others, you're seeing shaking hands.
So let me tell you, as you want all these institutions involved, those are the institutions which we experimented with, which have failed. We want Raila and Uhuru to sort it out for us.
What does sort it out mean?
Sort it out means, number one, do proper police reform. Let us have a country where a policeman does not take his gun under pressure. Remember in 2007, it is the same policemen who were involved. We have never even invested in them to rehabilitate them. Then you take them back again under the same scenarios. These are human beings. Yep. We must take care of our policemen. But a good policeman is a trained policeman. I said when the new constitution came that we needed to get experts from Commonwealth to come and rewrite our training manuals. You have policemen who have never shot a gun since they came from Kiganjo. And then you take them to do this. The first firing he does is against a citizen whom he's supposed to be protecting. I'm not blaming the police. I am blaming a system which has refused to reform. The second thing we need to do for posterity is IBC. Deal with this issue of botched elections every 5 years. It is possible. IBC can be reformed, and the best way to reform it are those things, Wahiga, that we need to be discussing in such fora, so that we begin to shape. We can't say Uhuru and Raila know everything. Now that they have provided us with a platform, I think we need to use platforms like this to begin to talk about our future and how best would it look if we did it differently. Lastly is the issue of devolution. There is simply too many counties in this country, Wambugu, and this should concern you because you are sitting in there, which are not viable. There is no way you can collect taxes from somebody in Kiambu to take it to a county that cannot collect zero. Yet in the constitution, we have equalization fund. Give them the equalization fund, but please stop disadvantaging majorities. We can't have a country where minorities brazenly disadvantage majorities. It is not right. We must talk about...
There could be a counter-argument to that. But
that is why the counter-argument is that the people who have must feed the people who don't. That is why we put 5% equalization fund in the constitution. And that somebody is getting away with so much, which is so wrong, because somebody gerrymandered with census. And we must face this thing now that we have an opportunity. I can tell you, like in Nyanza, the 4 Luo counties, they are not viable if they are not one county, because the only resource they have is the lake. Let us talk about the issues and say how these things, how we can harness our resources and so to feed the rest of us. And we can do that as a people. And this platform of handshake, to me, provides us with a perfect opportunity to talk about the real issues.
Fair enough. Steve, let me get your thoughts before I come to you, Honorable Wambugu.
Waiga, the Constitution has disallowed reliance on passion and discretion of the political elite, because there's no assurance when they're in terms, and when they fall out of each other, then we will be left wondering where to go to.
If the handshake is ever undone,
the Constitution has provided a predictable pathway that requires strengthening of key institutions. Of course, within the design of the Constitution, which is the 3 pillars of transparency, accountability, and inclusiveness, the inclusive approach to governance, and I'm talking about governance in the broader sense of the administration in power, the jubilee administration, and the political opposition. Sometimes the political opposition don't think that they're a form of government. They are the part of government. Government in the broader sense includes the administration and the political opposition. They must necessarily, as a consequence of the Constitution, cooperate and collaborate. You can't do without it. And if there is a handshake, it shouldn't be not so much reliance should be put on it as a result of the industry of politicians. It should be as a matter of course, because that is the new technique ordained by the Constitution. What I expect in building bridges going forward, even before we talk about the Big Four, I would like the Big Four to be punctuated or accompanied by some other concerns. One, commitment to disinherit bad manners from the past. You see, this Constitution requires, it presupposes really that the transformative superstructure will be implemented in the context of a matching political culture of decency and honesty. These are the software issues they're talking about. Are we innovating out of convenience, or are we innovating because of honesty and sincerity that we want to move forward as a country.
In mind, exactly.
So let us disinherit bad manners, number one. Number two, let us respect the Constitution. There is something that the Constitution is telling us. It seeks to inspire some form of national renewal. Let us recognize that and behave in a manner that promotes that. Number three, let us respect and strengthen all the institutions of governance. As we problem solve, let us not sidestep or overrule the mandate of key institutions of governance, because whatever, I would rather that this panel, the Paul Kimani team that's now looking at the critical issues, let them document, isolate, and refer. What issue needs to go to the Council of Governors and intergovernmental relations agencies? Let them go there. Let them not assume and constitutionally reassign functions that are located elsewhere just because they have the goodwill of politics. I think that one the Constitution is disallowed. In terms of the public, let us also remember that as Kenyans, as soon as we realize that we cannot forever rely on the goodwill of politicians, and we begin to find what is the predictable pathway within the Constitution,
away from the political class.
Politicians have been known, as you can just see, and I'm saying this with tremendous respect to Jubilee and NASA. No, this is very indecent for them to hear this. Sometimes back, they told us Uhuru Kenyatta is not the president. And I sat here and many other, and I said, listen, once the court has spoken with finality, we are bound by that. And people said, you're not the president. As a consequence of the handshake, now you are the president.
And they are trying to shake his hand as well.
Kenyans are required to fall into formation. I'm urging Kenyans
we still have the people
to reflect carefully, even if prayerful need there be,
on what has happened over the last 4 months.
Yes, and say,
changes,
listen, how can we harness the existing peace and tranquility to find a pathway that does not necessarily rely continuously on the political elite? These people disappoint us. One is on my left.
I like the way you're pointing to. I wish you could see that shot. You're pointing to both of them.
They disappoint us all the time. But I'm glad. I'm glad because as a consequence of the handshake, now we can now debate dispassionately without fear of victimization, or without fear that someone will be isolated. I think that is what we need now going forward.
Let me allow him to have the last word on this. Go ahead.
I was laughing because even as he challenges and points fingers, I mean, not in a bad way, to the political class, he then still admits that the reason we have a platform that we can now then have a constructive conversation is because two politicians went and shook hands. These two politicians went and shook hands, and because they shook hands, we are now able to have this conversation. But I think I would like to just make a couple of points. One, politicians are part of our society. Sometimes I listen to us speak about politicians, and you think there's some guys who came from Mars and just got beamed into parliament. These guys, I mean, a year and a half ago, I wasn't a member of parliament. I was a member of the society. You never know. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, I might not be a member of parliament.
Never know where
my brother was in parliament for several terms, and he's not in parliament now. So this idea that politicians are outside society is one of the things we did to dissuade, because it makes it look like we do not know what society is thinking about. Remember also, we actually generated from within the society. Every 5 years, society comes together, picks one of them, sends him to parliament. He becomes a political elite, as my brother here says. But it's for a period. After a while, you go back and you're not. I don't know whether you're still an elite after you leave parliament. So society is part. I mean, the political class is who we have given responsibility to lead us politically. But there's something Albert Einstein said that is very, very useful for this moment in time. In fact, I was actually writing so that I get it correct. We cannot solve problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And this is the thing, this is the reason that the Constitution is a dynamic document. Because sometimes we find ourselves in problems and we don't have any existing law or structure to get out of that problem. And you remember 2008 when we had to create a coalition government, we had to find a solution outside. We had to innovate. And I think we need to stop being scared about that. We need to get to accept that we are a dynamic community, we are a dynamic country, we are living in very fast times. That sometimes, I mean, was it a week ago, we were passing the cybercrimes bill in parliament. 10 years ago, nobody would have ever thought that we needed a bill to stop people from creating fake news or sending nudes. You know, I mean, really, Nobody would have thought about it. But because the system and the society has reached a point that we now need to change. So these are the things we need to keep thinking about. Even in our political problems, we are going to keep finding ourselves in holes that we get into that we don't have a rope or ladder that we can get out of existing, that we have to create one.
Fair enough.
This handshake is one of those things. And I think it's going to be important for us to just walk with it. I keep hearing people asking, okay, so what's the plan? And I'm thinking, you know, you must find that this is something we're going to go creating along the way. Because remember, the handshake started with two people, Uhuru and Raila, and then they gave two people work to start crafting. So when I listen to my brother, I'm thinking, for all we know, that's exactly what those guys are doing. They're isolating issues
are
going to go to the governors, that are going to go to the county, to the members in the assembly, that are going to go to Senate. And we need to accept no laws have been broken yet. Some of us are looking at this thing with that suspicion of these guys are about to break the law. They're about to change the constitution. No, nobody has said they're going to do any of those things. So I think since we have accepted that what happened was good for the country, let's walk with that sense of optimism and believe that, you know what, and let's also believe we have the capacity to stop politicians if they misbehave. Because we've always done that.
I think I did the right thing giving you the last word. I think you've wrapped up this conversation quite appropriately. Honorable Wambugu Ogola, I almost called you Honorable Ogola.
He's getting there. I can see he's getting there.
Thank you so much for having this very honest discussion, and thank you to everyone who's messaged us in as well.